Exclusive, U.S. left-wing groups traveled to Germany for the G20 Summit last July to meet with al-Qaeda and ISIS leaders and plot the destruction of President Trump, secret FBI investigation reveals. Best-selling author Edward Klein is set to release his latest book All Out War, The Plot to Destroy Trump. Klein makes the shocking revelation that an FBI investigation discovered collusion between American anarchists and ISIS and al-Qaeda. This is the greatest challenge to law enforcement since the Weather Underground and the Black Panther Party, the FBI report declared. It reveals the FBI sent a task force to Germany to report on radical groups that planned to protest President Trump's attendance at this year's G20 summit. The investigation determined that U.S.-backed anarchist, radical groups had traveled to Germany and took part in the violence. There was also evidence that 3 key leaders of an Oakland group met in Hamburg with a leader of the al-Qaeda. The foreign terrorists were helping them acquire the weapons they are seeking, primarily bomb-making equipment and toxic chemicals and gases. Edward Klein is the former editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine and the author of numerous bestsellers including his 4th book on the Clintons, Guilty as Sin, in 2016. His latest book is All Out War, The Plot to Destroy Trump will be released October 30, 2017. A secret FBI investigation of the violent resistance movement on college campuses against President Trump has led to an alarming discovery: the collusion between American anarchists and foreign terrorists in the Islamic State and al-Qaeda, according to a confidential informational report by FBI field offices. There is clearly overwhelming evidence that there are growing ties between U.S. radicals and the Islamic State, as well as several ISIS offshoots and splinter groups, stated the FBI field report, which was delivered to Acting Director Andrew McCabe on July 11, 2017, and which is being published for the first time in my new book All Out War, The Plot to Destroy Trump. The FBI report on efforts by Islamic terrorists to recruit followers among violent U.S. groups like Antifa corroborates President Trump's controversial claim, following last summer's deadly protests in Charlottesville, Virginia, that left-wing anarchist groups are just as dangerous as right-wing white supremacists. A secret FBI investigation of the violent resistance movement on college campuses against President Trump has led to an alarming discovery: the collusion between American anarchists and foreign terrorists in the Islamic State and al-Qaeda. Pictured above are the protests in Charlottesville, Virginia. This is the greatest challenge to law enforcement since the Weather Underground and the Black Panther Party, the FBI report declared. Last summer, the FBI dispatched a task force to Europe to report on massive demonstrations planned by radical groups, such as the German contingent Antifascistische Action, to protest President Trump's attendance at a meeting of leaders and central bank governors of the G20 group of major industrialized countries. Task force covered G20 meeting in Hamburg, studied intel from local authorities, Interpol, and other assets, determined that as assumed U.S.-backed anarchist, radical groups had traveled to Germany and took place in the violence, the FBI's summary stated. There is also evidence of meetings between these individuals and associates of ISIS. There is an urgent need to closely surveil the identified individuals. The agents sent by the FBI paid particular attention to a group of anarchists from Oakland, a major port city that lies adjacent to the campus of the University of California at Berkeley, the scene of several violent protests. It reveals the FBI sent a task force to Germany to report on radical groups that planned to protest President Trump's attendance at this year's G20 summit, pictured, and found U.S.-backed anarchist, radical groups had traveled to Germany and met with terrorists. While there has been military progress in Iraq against the Islamic State, their influence in Europe and throughout the world is clearly growing, the report said. Now that the Bureau has determined they have followers in the radical U.S. resistance movement in the United States, It is clear there will be additional violence in the attacks on law enforcement and U.S. institutions, including banks. Ties between three key leaders of the Oakland group, names redacted, met in Hamburg with a leader of the AQIP, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and the AQIM, al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the report continued. The leader from AQIP is an Egyptian-born male, name redacted, who is known to be in charge of finances and recruiting for the group. There is evidence from informants that he is helping the Oakland group acquire the weapons they are seeking, primarily bomb-making equipment and toxic chemicals and gases. One of the men from Oakland traveled to Syria to meet with ISIS. The purpose was for training and tactics, but was thought to be primarily a bonding visit to discuss possible massive disruptive attacks in the U.S. While in Hamburg, several of the Oakland-based criminals were photographed throwing Molotov cocktails and wielding iron bars, which have been their weapons of choice, though they are almost certainly on the verge of upping the caliber of their weaponry for use in the U.S. Despite having their faces covered by masks, they were positively identified. This group and their connections with the radical Islamic groups must be disrupted and destroyed. Action has been taken with the appropriate agencies to see that these named individuals will be identified when they return to the United States. It has not been determined if they will be detained or surveilled. Making some sort of common cause with Americans who are determined to commit violence against the U.S. makes them potentially very useful to radical Islam. Before he was fired as director of the FBI, James Comey collected intelligence on the connections between Middle Eastern jihadis, European radicals, and the American anarchists who are part of the anti-Trump resistance movement. The Americans communicate with the Islamic State and other terrorist organizations on websites, and they use those websites to download instructions on making weapons, said an FBI source who had access to Comey's intelligence reports. As the Trump administration has demonstrated it's serious about destroying the Islamic State, and depriving ISIS of territory in Iraq and Syria, the alliance between the American radicals and ISIS has grown even closer. The internet chatter between the Americans and the Islamists is astronomical. The FBI is really playing catch-up ball, because the Obama administration refused to give the Bureau the resources it needed to effectively infiltrate and surveil the radical groups on college campuses, the source continued. Any talk of a connection between radical Islam, a phrase the Obama people wouldn't even use, and American extremists was pretty much laughed off. Former Attorney General Loretta Lynch would have blown a gasket if she heard that the FBI was surveilling so-called college political organizations. All that has changed under the Trump administration. Everyone's aware that the resistance movement, with its effort to get rid of Trump by any means necessary, has created fertile soil for ISIS and al-Qaeda to establish a beachhead in America. Ed Klein's latest book is All Out War. The Plot to Destroy Trump will be released October 30, 2017.